Hello and welcome. I'm Dave Hortino, Chief Strategy Officer over here at Netline. Today we'll be walking forward through the progression of really trying to understand how to take a persona-based mindset specific to ABM strategies and translate that into person-related executions. Typically, a lot of us are challenged with living in this persona-based environment and simultaneously using company-level data to inform strategy and tactical executions downstream. Yet a buyer is always at the person level, which inherently translates into buyer level insights. And so what we're going to do is really try to first understand, why are things constantly relegated to being at the company level and the persona level at an anonymous basis? And how do we go about getting to a person level? We've got 30 minutes to cover a lot of ground, so we're going to dive quickly in. And so first off, the facts, right? The industry, by and large, has been designed to be built this way. And what I mean by that is that there is simply too much money in the game to support a direct investment and cognizant decision of unmasking users and relying on users' first-party data to drive downstream actions. Think about it this way. It's far easier to sell on a CPM basis than it is to sell on a CPC and or even a CPL or a CPA. There's a reason for that. Showing impressions, i.e. banners, i.e. any other attribution touch point upstream, whereby we don't know the user, allows us to tap into personas, magnify at scale, and continuously rinse and repeat, thereby never really understanding how that spend towards the persona audience base is actually translating and distilling down into actual persons inside those organizations. When we're looking about the migration of the industry itself and what that means to the marketer, there's some clear and stark realities as to what we're all suffering with today, and some of us are better positioned than others. But if you're relying on Google here for this stat, 92% of leading marketers believe using first-party data as continuously build an understanding of what people want is critical to growth. That said, only 37% of companies are very prepared for a cookieless world. That's according to Adobe's 2021 report. Clearly, massive gap there in observations, right? Everyone's bought in, yet no one's really prepared to execute as to what this means to them. We've got simultaneously Google taking a step back, right? Saying, whoa, perhaps we moved a little too quickly on deprecating third-party cookies because of that first slide, which is that there is simply too much money and too many high-powered organizations invested in the livelihood of cookies, quite honestly, period. You've got simultaneously Apple still holding the charge here by saying that we are moving forward with blocking IP addresses within first mail on all iOS devices, starting with iOS 14.5. What that means is for any of you using ABM-centric solutions relying upon IP addresses to distill company-level observations, those solutions are compromised. The scary next thing that most of those organizations should be thinking about is, what happens when IP address transparency gets blocked at the browser level, not only by Apple, but by Google as well? Arguably, you've got Firefox and Brave and countless others doing kind of yeoman's work, trying to invest heavily in security. Yet if Google makes a major decision there, it really would re-architect the ABM landscape as a whole. And you need to be cognizant of that, of thinking about what technologies you're relying on. What are those technologies relying on to execute and to identify company-level insights? And how can you push those technologies and or alternative solutions to get you closer to the buyer through buyer-level insights? So comically, as we stand here in this crux of crisis, right, we've got an industry hell-bent on doing things the way that we need to keep doing things to protect revenue. Yet you've got marketers being bombarded over the head with the realities of the fact that they've been the ones abusing cookies. They've been the ones over-cooking users and over-selling, distributing, monetizing data. You've got simultaneously you as a marketer talking out of two sides of your face. One side to the actual user saying, yeah, we're all about user experience and delivering great content and enriching the experience and driving dialogue with our prospects. Yet simultaneously, you're using countless vendors behind the scenes to extract anonymous data sets about those organizations, about the behavior of those users, what those users are doing without the user ever knowing. And so this really brings us to where we're at today in the overall industry itself, and that users have had enough. Governments have had enough. And quite honestly, that's forcing change. And it's change that the industry is not willing to accept still. Google wasn't prepared to even hear about the repercussions that they were forcing out. IAB is ill-equipped to handle this at this point. And so what you're seeing now is users not only pushing back through government, but pushing back into consumption behavior and what sites they're willing to participate with, those that are transparent and invest into a clear and concise user journey are those where users are feeling comfortable in sharing first-party information and getting to that kind of buyer-level type disclosures. Simultaneously, you've got users aggressively blocking anything that could possibly resemble a banner ad. And so if you're relying on an ABM solution that's heavily rooted in display-oriented traffic mechanisms to expose your message, keep in mind that literally every single day their effectiveness becomes less and less effective, simply by the nature of users have having enough. Users consistently are saying that I don't need to be targeted this way. I've not intentionally shared my information with anyone, yet clearly I'm being sold at scale. If you use like Ghostery or even Firefox, open a web page, look at the amount of tags that are firing on that user at that millisecond. Typically it's 30 to 70 tags, meaning 30 to 70 times that user's data was just sold. And clearly a correction is currently happening in the marketplace, and the pendulum has really returned back towards user rights, and really context is driving a lot of that. Yet we as B2B marketers still need to know things, right? It's not all doom and gloom. And there are ways of getting the insights and richness that we want to have from our buyers, but we don't necessarily always have to do them in this shady way that we've been predisposed to do so over the past decade. And so first-party data really allows you to understand not only what the person is and who they are and where they work, but truly what their pain points might be. What kind of content do they favor? The gaps in time between the content being consumed. And so what I'd like to do is try to visualize what the different types of content data there are in the marketplace, what that means at a corporate versus buyer level, and then we'll actually dive into some real-world simulations of what that stuff looks like. And so when you hear me keep talking about first-party data and third-party data, the way to distill that upwards is to think about it as persona versus person, right? So first-party data is the person. This is literally Jane, who has an accounting role, who's registered for a webinar about accounting software suites at this time, at this day, with this IP address and geolocation and so on. All of that data is voluntarily provided to the vendor who's created that content in return for the understanding that the user is going to receive compelling content in return, right? It's all about equitable exchanges of data versus content. Third-party signals and third-party data sets typically are captured at a third-party cookie level. It's completely anonymous and ambiguous to the user. The user has no idea that this is occurring. And that's occurring at scale, repeatedly, billions of times a day. And because of that, you can never get to the who. You can never get to the buyer within a specific organization. You're always distilled to company-level signals, company-level intent observations, with the hope of extrapolating. Some organizations might say that they will triangulate around who is actually in those companies that possibly could be expressing intent. The reality is they don't know. It's an educated guess. First-party data is not an educated guess. It's 100% accurate. You know it was Jane. You know it was Jim. You know their title. You know what they're doing. If they've opted to actually share deeper level understandings of their pain points, you'll actually know those things too, versus looking at it and saying, well, Jane spent 4.6 seconds on this web page in comparison to the time she spent and or her peers spent last week, so therefore she must be in market. Clearly, there's a lot of flaws in that. And so when we break this down going further, go from persona to person, we're also looking at the company level data and the buyer level data, and what that means to you as a marketer. Company level insights, I'm not saying disregard them. They're valuable. The problem is they're not all that actionable. And they also are by design uh, really keeping you stuck in company level observations. And so what continuously happens is you're learning more about the company. You're continuously trafficking campaigns and executions around those company level observations, yet not really making much progress because you still have never unearthed the who, the actual person in that account expressing intent, and simply relying on them to finally disclose themselves and say, hey, I'm Jane, and I do want to talk with you. And that's after you spent countless time, effort, budget executing in that capacity. And so augmenting that with a buyer level mindset and a strategic focus allows you to effectively cause change. Change looks something like this, right? Instead of shifting towards a persona based model, shift towards a person one, right? Start thinking about not just the generalities of your persona being Jane and she loves chicken sandwiches and has 2 dogs, a white picket fence, and lives on Main Street, USA. And believe me, I've heard of those types of personas, to something far more accurate. And the far more accurate elements is because of the fact that it's based upon first party data actually dissolving truth, right? It really acts as your epicenter of truth. And so this kind of data is captured directly from your users. They're willing to voluntarily give it to you. This notion that you need to be spying on audiences constantly in order to learn what they're doing, yet when you can just ask people questions, it really is kind of speaking to this moment in time in our industry as to where we're at as marketers and whether you want to be that marketer. Do you want to be that marketer that literally the first touch point you have with your prospects is based upon spying on them, is based upon monitoring behavior that you cannot validate, but you assume and or have modeled or triangulated to be accurate? Or do you want to base it upon real world data that first party users have provided to you voluntarily, thereby disclosing their intent and interest to engage? This is a great example. You're seeing a person who had registered for a webinar, and I'm reporting here that this person actually prefers webinars based upon their consumption behavior history. And so we can learn things like that, right? It's not just about this person registered for one piece of content, but what formats of content? What were the format structures and time allocations to those pieces of content? The job level, the industry, the job area, and so on. So when you get back to the company level insights and intent signals, you'll never know those things, right? There's always the assumption that if you're a company selling to marketers and you're seeing company level observations based upon your keywords, that those are also being generated by marketers. You don't know that for a fact. It could be their peers throughout the organization. It could be someone on the IT side who's actually looking at deployment of solutions. You don't know. All right. It's just company level data that's mapped back to an IP address, period. First party data always is going to be rooted in the who, which always will be providing not only the company level stuff by default, but also their job area, their job level, their authority and decision making power, and so on. Getting further in the consumption side of things, though, this is where it gets really intriguing, which is where you can start to see how much time it takes in between additional pieces of content being consumed. And when I'm talking about pieces of content, I'm not talking about reading a web page and spending 1.3 seconds there and bouncing. I'm talking about voluntarily registering for detailed, well-produced content, whether it be a webinar, a white paper, an analyst report, you name it. And the time spent inside that content, the time spent between requesting additional content, and how that stacks up against their peers. In terms of activating those observations, again, it just allows you to go further. You'd be really deploying the same motion or playbook that you would already have learned by using company level signals, but distilling that further into more deeply personalized outreach. And so if you know it's Jane, you clearly can do homework around who's Jane's support staff, right? Who else is in Jane's team? Within Jane's team, who are the other influencers within that organization that theoretically Jane needs to gain consensus decision from? That allows you to then execute additional campaigns, again, at the person level towards those folks. You can even reach out to Jane, specifically acknowledging that I'm assuming your CFO is also going to need to sign off on this. I know your CFO's name is Meredith. at this point, let's get some content specifically aimed at addressing Meredith's perceived pain points and accelerate that dialogue. Again, it's based off of first-party education versus third-party guessing. A lot of this comes down to tailoring campaign outreach, using that outreach to not only identify what's happening within those accounts that have kind of unearthed themselves, but then using that first-party data to better identify other like accounts and other like people in those accounts. So if you're seeing a trend through first-party data that Jane inside a company that has a specific industry, company size, annualized revenues, geographic footprint, is expressing high intent and also has high needs for solutions that you offer, it's quite likely that you can then take that first-party data set and extrapolate that outwards into other what we would consider, most of you would consider to be lookalike organizations and lookalike peers. Find those other Janes, right? Use that data to find those other Janes. The playbook and the motion of repeating at that point has already been done. It's already clearly defined and very easy to activate. So I'm assuming up until here, you're probably nodding your head saying, yeah, Dave, this all sounds great, but how am I going to get people to give me data? They're just not going to. And so at the core, they will. You've just got to trust the fact that A, you can ask users this information, and B, give them a reason to believe, right? Give them a reason to believe in you as a marketer, to believe in your brand. Up until now, and due to a lot of the slides that we covered earlier, a lot of that was about damage being done to the marketplace, right? We as marketers, whether we want to admit this or not, have done a terrible job over the past decade at abusing user rights and abusing data usage, period. I don't think anyone can challenge that statement. And so it's about now having a moment where collectively the world is saying enough. And you can choose to continue down that path or use this moment to set a refresh in your mind, in your go-to-market strategy, in your messaging, and your disclosures to your potential prospects and customers. Humans have an inherent need to feel like they're giving and learning along the way. And so when you're giving up hopefully a rich content experience whereby the user feels like they're part of building something with you. And it's not just a straight up, maybe registration for a demo. It should be something more. Be transparent about that, what that means to them, right? Will they get learnings of a study after the fact? People love that. That's why surveys get completed in the first place. Also try to remove the mention of the brand itself. Right? When you're talking about your brand, immediately every marketer loves to do that, but the buyers are all saying, whoa, I know exactly what's going to happen here, right? I'm jumping right into the sales funnel head first. No thanks. Even if they have great intent to engage with the brand, they just might not be willing to talk to you, especially these days. And so try taking a little bit more vendor agnostic approach, right? Content forward, vendor agnostic, focus on pain points, less about you, focus on the buyer. They will aggressively start sharing information. And here's two examples as to how you can go about doing this. The left-hand side one we'll get to in a moment, but this comes down to using predictive form technologies that really lessens the lift for your audiences, right? We don't want your audiences working hard to try to give information. That's clearly always the concern as a marketer. How do I get as much information as possible, but also make the life and efficiency of my user experience really minimal and make it lean, make it a good experience for the user so that they can get what they want, but we can also get what we want. Marketers have always struggled with that balance and perpetually will. I'll show you one solution in a moment. The other side is progressive profiling on the right-hand side. And what you're seeing here is once you know the actual first-party data, you know it's Jane and you know Jane's role and you know the company that she works in. It's time to progressively start asking questions each time you actually engage with Jane. In this case, this is a product we built, but you can theoretically do this in a million different ways. Even email, even sales rep outreach or BDR outreach could effectively do this. And so it's never once about selling anything. It's never once about misguiding the user into thinking that we're getting them into a demo session or anything like that. It's simply about learning, taking those learnings and applying those learnings into future outbound communications, campaign executions, and understandings as to where that person and or that company might stand in their journey as it relates to the offerings that we and or you have as an organization. So ask those questions, get users engaged, make them feel like they're part of this process, and stop abusing anonymous data sets whereby the user has no idea that they're actively even partaking in this. So when we jump to this next slide here, you are going to see, push this live. You're going to see this technology in effect. And so it's all about offering equitable exchanges. And what I mean by that is give great content to users, of course. I'm not here to talk about content today. We all know the importance of that, but still putting great content around a really pain in the butt gate, which is incredibly aggressive and is asking a ton of questions, and questions which arguably a lot of times you don't even know what to do with the data. At that point, you're capturing data and making it harder for the user, yet simultaneously that data inbound is being sent not only in a marketing automation system, also over to sales, and they probably ignore most of it. And so using a tool that has a predictive form that's able to do real-time lookups across the B2B web, pre-populate registration data for your audience, thereby taking a registration experience from perhaps a frictionless experience where they type in their email address and they're cleared to download, or perhaps they just need to type in a few more fields depending upon what's recognized in that call. Either way, you've dramatically altered that user experience and first point of engagement with your content and lessened the form registration values. Typically, you're seeing an increase in conversions on your forms in excess of 70%. It's massive, right? Even if you're a small marketer and a small company and your volume to your own forms today represent 100 users submitting forms today, I guarantee you that 1,000 users have gotten to those forms and have abandoned. And so what happens if you were able to recover 70% of those? What does that mean to your sales funnel? What does that mean to your nurture path? And so on. You can model that out, do the math. It clearly is always a compelling business case. So I'm going to leave you with a little secret here today as well. I've talked a lot about first-party data. I've talked a lot about some of the things to do, some of the things not to do. But I haven't actually given you a way to get some of that first-party data immediately. And so what we've done here is we've developed a tool called Audience Explorer. It's completely free. It's ungated. It allows you real-time access into a 180 days of rolling B2B content consumption data that's being generated on the backs of 700,000 registrations for content per month across our platform. And so what I've done here is taken a little screenshot and recording. We're going to jump forward to this. Push that to you. And what we'll see here in a moment is, hold on, push. What you're going to see here is a live view into the tool itself and actually how B2B content consumption can be sorted. As that report is being generated, there's a ton of rich data around the job level, the job area, the industry, the sub-industry, what content formats are trending for specific types of people in specific types of companies, and so on. All of that data can be extrapolated. You can take a snapshot of the report. You can come back every day. Obviously, if you'd like to activate a campaign beyond that, we are more than willing to help you out with that, or you can even kickstart the campaign yourself through a self-service interface. But realistically, this tool is about educating marketers, right? And it gets back to the spirit of what I was saying earlier, which is try to develop stuff, whether it's content, experiences, tools, whatever it might be, that are invested not only in working on a buyer level basis and creating dialogue with your key prospects, but give something that's investing into their future, right? Doing so builds trust, which is hopefully the goal of all of us as we're trying to dig out of this hole of marketers being perceived as nothing more than data mongers and quite honestly, abusive those at that. And so we'll jump ahead here. And this is all being done based upon that registration volume, right? We're not giving this tool out for free because of the fact that we just simply think it's cool. It's the fact that we believe that as you see this as a marketer, you start asking questions of yourself that, okay, where is this data coming from? How are users going about consuming this content? How would I like to learn more about that if I was a marketer? And again, it's all about the gated first-party data and content consumption behavior that's being processed across the platform. and nothing more, right? This is about users getting what they need to make informed decisions by using content that's being produced today to make tomorrow's business and or technical decisions. And so what I'm going to do is just leave you with a closing note, right? So that we've talked a lot about here of the importance of getting back to user first, privacy first, buyer centric, and person based executions. It's the marketers today that make decisions into investing into those very ideas that will be around to recognize success in the future. And again, our data supports the fact that this isn't me verbalizing this, and this isn't me about trying to convince you to become a Netline client. Theoretically, if anything, I want you to do this well beyond these Netline. Your buyers are waiting. They're willing to disclose where they're at, where their intent is, and you don't need to rely on manipulated data sets, spying-based data sets, third-party cookies, and tracking anonymous data sets. Your users are there. They're willing to have a dialogue with you as a brand. It's up to you to do so. Thank you.